Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Dr. Srikumar Rao in New York. Srikumar has been called the business Buddha and the happiness guru. He helps intelligent, driven, ambitious people to find deep meaning in their careers. He's also the author of multiple books, including Happiness at Work, Be Resilient, Motivated, and Successful, No Matter What. Srikumar, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Angela.
Well, I'm so excited to chat with you. You talk about how happiness is really a birthright, and I found this to be fascinating as a thought process. What do you mean by that, happiness is a birthright?
What I mean is every single one of us is born with an intrinsic capacity and an intrinsic inclination to be happy. There was a time when I watched it was a film crew actually at Darfur at the time when Darfur was held up as a symbol of the extreme deprivation that people can be subject to, and obviously they were living in very horrible conditions. But even in those very horrible conditions, when the film crew was going about, you could see these small urchins clustering around them and peering at the cameras. Quite possibly they'd never seen the camera before. And there was actually a film crew filming the street lads in Darfur following the camera crew. And you could see from the smiles on their face that there was, at that instant at least, genuine happiness there. As a small child, if you go back, you can remember how you could be totally absorbed in a cat chasing its own tail or a dog frolicking in a mud puddle, things of that nature. So we have the capacity to be completely absorbed and joyful at small things or nothing at all. And we lose that capacity as we grow older. And my thesis is you don't have to lose that capacity. That's what I mean when I say happiness is our birthright.
When you say, that's so interesting, because you're right. When we're children, it is easier to remember a time when maybe we were happy. What do you think, generally speaking, it is that causes us to kind of lose that happiness as we grow older?
We become conditioned. We become conditioned by the people in our lives, by our parents, teachers, coaches. We become conditioned by the media. We become conditioned by the entire culture. And this conditioning tells us that we have to get something so we can do something so we can be something. So, for example, we have to get a great deal of money so we can go to exotic places on vacation so we can be happy. We have to find someone so we can be in a relationship with that person, so we can have great sex, so we can be happy. All of these are variations of what I call the if-then model. And the if-then model states that if something happens, then I will be happy. If I get promoted, if I have a bigger house, if I find myself in a fulfilling relationship. It doesn't matter what the if is. There's always the notion that if I get something, then I will be happy. That's a fundamentally flawed model, but we buy into it with every fiber of our being. And as we buy into it, we lose the ability to live in the moment and enjoy it that we had as children.
That is so true. You know, I was someone who grew up without a lot of money, and I really was very ambitious in my own career. I'm probably still very ambitious, but I was able to sort of work my way up the corporate ladder very quickly, becoming a director at like 27 or something, and a vice president at something like 32. And the more money that I was able to earn, it never quite equaled happiness in the way I had pictured it in my mind. Being able to buy things or travel more, it really didn't seem to make a difference.
Absolutely correct. Buying things is wonderful, but buying things with the expectation that this will make you happy, that's where the problem is.
I wonder, do you think that there are certain cultures or certain regions in the world where people feel this way more than others, or do you think it's pretty universal?
It's pretty universal at this stage because we live in an interconnected world, and if we are interconnected, then basically what happens is we buy into it, everybody. So particularly in the realms in which I function, which are the graduates of top business schools, persons who are already pretty successful, defined in conventional terms, they all pretty much think the same way.
Yeah.
So we're increasingly getting to the point where the single culture, it's American culture, which is basically being spread out throughout the world.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like maybe social media, I would think, adds to that some too, because we're all sort of comparing with each other what the other person is doing, and we are seeing the best versions of ourselves. We're putting out the best versions of ourselves on places like Facebook.
Yep. There's been a lot of research, and it's still coming out, basically showing that persons spend a lot of time on social media are unhappier as a result of that time spent. And as someone put it out, the problem with that is we are comparing everybody's show reels with our outtakes.
Oh, yes, that's so true.
Way of putting it. We're comparing everybody's show reels with our outtakes.
That's the perfect way to say it. Well, if we're listening today and we are finding ourselves very unhappy at work and we're really not sure where to begin, do you have a suggestion for us on where we might start?
Yes. Well, actually what happens is my programs are designed specifically to help people cope with this kind of a situation, and I begin by inviting people to think about their mental chatter. Their mental chatter is an internal monologue that is going on all the time in their head. So typically when you see something like this, it'll be, she has such a wonderful life. She's going to exotic places. She's doing very well in her job. Why aren't I like that? I wish I could have. And it goes on like that. And the point is, this is untrue on several levels. First of all, you don't know what that person's life is like. You just know what you imagine that person's life is like.
Mm-hmm.
And second, even if that person's life is like that, is that the kind of life that's right for you? And do you need to have all of those things to be happy? The short answer is no. Your life is you. You are unique. And every time you compare yourself with somebody else, you're setting yourself up for resentment, frustration, failure. It's just the nature of the beast. You will try to be the very best you can. You will try to achieve great things outside, but you will try to achieve great things outside because that is, in some sense, you're allowing your potential to flourish. You do not need to have that happen to be happy. You do not need to have that happen to be better than somebody else, because that way it's a sure road to perdition.
That makes a lot of sense. What about a situation where, say, we believe that the reason that we're unhappy is, for example, our boss has chosen not to promote us or recognize us in a way that we would prefer, that we think we should be. In that sort of situation, is it best that we just accept the relationship with our boss, or is it better to go pursue something else? Or, where does happiness, kind of come into something like that?
Okay, here is something that is very important. All of us have a tendency to think that our boss derailed our careers, and we think of our boss as this hugely powerful creature out there, and your boss has tremendous influence on you. Your boss can fire you, your boss can give you plum assignments, can promote you, can increase your salary, and so on. That's a terrible way to think about your boss, and it poisons the relationship right there.
Mm-hmm.
I ask persons in my program to think of their boss as a FedEx guy. The FedEx guy delivers the package to you, and you say thank you because you're polite, but you never ever believe that the package came from the FedEx person. The package came from somewhere else. In exactly the same way, the boss is simply an instrument of delivery. Whether it's a promotion or whether it's a pink slip, the boss is an instrument of delivery, and it actually came from somewhere out there. The universe gave it to you. So you will deal with the boss as appropriate, but recognize that whatever happened from outside. The boss is an instrument of delivery. The boss is the FedEx guy. And when you have it in your model, when you have it in your head that your boss is a FedEx guy, then all of a sudden you'll find that you're not bothered by what he does, because your boss, by virtue of his hierarchical position, can control what you spend your time on, how much time you spend on it, things like that, but he has no control over your well-being unless you hand over that control.
Wow, I like that. It's almost like saying that everything that you do every day, what I hear in that is everything you do every day impacts you. It's like what you're putting out into the universe comes back. So it's not just one interaction, it's like a collection of interactions.
It's basically the arc of your entire life.
Wow. I love thinking about it that way. Well, I've noticed that you also talk a lot about investing in the process rather than the outcome. And it really resonated with me. I actually talked to a job seeker recently who said, I want to go and interview for this job at my company, but only if I know that the hiring manager will select me, because otherwise it's a total waste of my time. And that's just maybe one example that kind of hit a nerve with me. I'm curious, why do you think this is so important, investing in the process rather than the outcome?
Because what happens, Angela, is most of us live our lives the following way. I set a goal for myself, I succeeded, life's a blast. Or I set a goal for myself, I failed, life sucks. So we live our life on a sinusoidal curve, oscillating between elation and despair, and we tend to spend more time at the despair end of the spectrum. It's a lousy way to live life, because any goal is inherently outside our control. Maybe we will get to it, maybe we won't get to it. It really doesn't matter, because what we can do is, once we have set the goal, and this is something that I talk about in all of my programs, goals are very important because they establish direction. Once the direction has been established, forget about the goals. Instead, put all of your emotional energy into what are the things that I have to do in order to achieve my goal. And when you do that, you'll actually start enjoying the journey. And really speaking, the journey is the only thing you have. The destination is a mirage. You're there, and then you're gone.
That's true. I mean, it seems like
The only thing you have in life is the journey, and when you're too busy focusing on the destination, you miss the journey.
That makes a lot of sense. It almost sounds like when we focus only on the outcome, we're also focused just on the risk and the negative experience and what the negative outcome could be, rather than, like you said, the journey.
And there's something else also, by the way, which is when you do not obsess about the outcome, the probability you will get to the outcome that you want actually increases.
I could see that. Absolutely. Well, as we kind of talk about, happiness and think about it, where does resilience play a part into the whole thing?
Well, one of the things that I strongly emphasize is, by the way, we're talking about invest in the process and not the outcome. There's one other false belief most of us have, and that is that the function of setting a goal is to achieve the goal. And I say that that's not so.
Okay.
The function of setting a goal and trying your level best to achieve it is the learning and growth that are engendered in you as you try your level best to achieve the goal. If you succeed, wonderful. If you actually reach the goal, that's a bonus. But even if you don't reach the goal, but you did try your level best to achieve it, then the learning that happened in you and the growth that you experienced in trying to do so, that is your principal benefit. So it's a no-lose situation if you follow that strategy.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that a lot. Well, as we think about it, if we have a sense, like a nagging sense, that we've not achieved as much as we should have, is there something we can do to sort of turn the boat around, or is it?
Absolutely there is. And once again, as I said, it begins with examining your mental chatter. So the thought that I haven't achieved as much as I can is your mental chatter. And that again gets you hooked into goal-oriented thinking, which is, I should have achieved X and I didn't. Instead of that, consider the big mountain, and you're not really concerned with leveling the mountain. You're simply concerned with, let me take a little bit of that and throw it into the ocean. And you keep doing that. And as you do that, you'll be surprised at how much progress you make. There's the old joke, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time.
True. That's very true.
So don't focus on, here is what I should have accomplished, here is what I haven't done, but simply say, this is what I would like to do, and you chip away at it bit by bit consistently, make it a habit, and you will be surprised at how much you get done.
That makes sense. Do you feel like people get to this place where they have that sense that they haven't achieved what they were supposed to? Do they hit it at certain points, like let's say when they turn 40 or when they turn 50, or like are there...
Typically at the end of a decade when they take stock, it happens, but it can happen at any time. And it certainly happens in any environment where you meet a lot of successful people. Like I have taught at many of the world's top business schools, and invariably there's someone there who says, I should already have done so much more. And there was my classmate, and he's barely 21, and he started a business, and he's got so many zeros after his net worth statement. And it starts at any age.
That makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. I definitely can relate to that. I mean, coming out of high school, I was the valedictorian, and then I went to a top engineering school where you're suddenly sort of like at the bottom of the pile, and you go from feeling smart and good about yourself to really wondering if you even belong in this group.
Yes.
And
absolutely, yes.
I've heard that sometimes, not that I wish I had done this, I'm really happy about the path I took, but I've heard that sometimes when you go to maybe a less competitive school, you can actually sometimes do more with your career because you're a big fish in a small pond in a sort of way, or you're, I don't know, you don't compare yourself to others in the same way.
That is probably true. In other words, it's much better to go. And I heard this argument made a number of times, especially with regard to equal employment opportunity and so on. Maybe some of these kids shouldn't be going to Harvard. They'd be much happier and able to do better if they were in a lesser school. And all of that, of course, is dependent upon the stories that you tell yourself.
Right.
And I think that you can be at any place, and if you don't compare yourself to others from the perspective of this makes them better as a person, you can simply say, okay, this makes them better in this particular field, and guess what? I may not be able to go up there, but I can be better than I am. And if you don't let it affect your sense of worth as a person, then it really doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But you really have to come to grips with that idea and work on it until you're comfortable in your own skin. Mm-hmm. This isn't something that happens overnight.
No, I think you're right. And I'm actually a huge supporter of encouraging people to go to top schools if they can do it. I think, just for example, the business network you walk away with and the exposure you get to amazing professors. I mean, it's incredible. But I did notice that when you're around so many other people who are also successful, who, also got a perfect score on their SAT or whatever, it's hard. It's hard, or it can be, I should say. Well, I think you talk a little bit about ambiguity, and I'm curious, from your perspective, is it good to be comfortable with ambiguity, or maybe not, and why or why not?
And the short answer is, of course, it's good to be comfortable with ambiguity, because you're always going to have ambiguity in your life. We all want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen next week, how am I going to succeed, am I going to get that promotion or not, am I going to get a salary increase. We all want to know that, and we will never know all of those things. And that's the nature of life. So the more you are comfortable with the way things are, with striving to make things different from the way they are because you have a vision, but being perfectly comfortable whether you achieve your vision or not, just so long as you do your level best to make it appear, to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And whatever happens, you're at ease with that. And when you're there, you find that you are comfortable with ambiguity, because it's not that you know what's going to happen, it's that you have a great deal of confidence that whatever happens, you will be able to deal with it appropriately.
Ooh, I like that.
That is a very powerful feeling.
That you'll be able to deal with it appropriately. I like that.
That's exactly correct. Whatever happens, you will be able to deal with it appropriately.
Yeah. It almost reminds me, with this whole focusing on the process rather than the outcome, that reminds me, if we were talking to a small child, we would encourage them to do their very best. And we wouldn't focus on whether or not they win the game or get the prize or whatever, but it would be really important to us that they do their best. And I think it's kind of like taking that idea and bringing it back to ourselves as adults.
That's exactly right, yes.
Well, you also mentioned, I have a quote from you. You said, you have to think differently, not just differently, but also in a manner that gives you joy, serenity, and accomplishment. And I wanted to ask, what did you mean by that quote, and how can we think differently?
Okay, that has a number of ramifications, and the principal one is that we think that accomplishing something is going to bring us happiness, and we think that happiness is something that persists. Happiness is not something that persists unless you anchor yourself in the notion that every day, in every way, you are fulfilled. You have a vision of the world, and you're trying your level best to make that happen. But even as you're trying to make that happen, you are anchored in a sense that I'm okay, I have always been okay, I always will be okay, and I cannot not be okay. Because we are in the human predicament, and as long as we're in the human predicament, stuff will happen. There will be serious illness and death, there will be relationship problems, there will be financial setbacks, there will be serious illness and death. This is all part and parcel of being in the human predicament. We will deal with these as appropriate. But we will deal with these as appropriate from a place of profound well-being. And this is something that is achievable for everyone, regardless of outside circumstances.
Wow, that's interesting. It makes me think, like, when you talk to someone, say they've been through, as a child, a lot of trauma, and maybe it's kind of followed them into their adulthood so that they worry a lot. Like, how can you mentally make that shift? I mean, it just makes me wonder, into that place where you decide that you're going to be okay no matter what, when that maybe wasn't your experience when you were little.
See, what happens when you were little is stuff happen. In fact, I was talking to someone today who was abused multiple times as a child, and abused by the very persons who, you'd normally think of as protectors.
Right.
And she said, as a result of that, I can't trust anybody. And we had a very long session, and basically what I pointed out to her is, yes, this happened in the past. But because this happened, I can't trust anyone, is a story that you are telling yourself.
Mm.
And you don't have to tell yourself that story.
And
so every time what happens is stuff happened to us, that's true. But what we tell about the stuff that happened to us is a story.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to repeat that story.
You mean that we don't have to repeat the pattern again?
Yes, we don't have to repeat the statin, and we don't have to repeat the story that because this happened, I am damaged, because this happened, I don't trust anyone. That's the story you tell yourself. And you can change the story you tell yourself. I remember I had someone who was a graduate of a top business school. She took my program, and she'd been abused several times when she was young. She went through the usual drugs, foster home, stuff like that. And she would always say, and because she was very bright, she'd get hired, but then she had a temperament where she antagonized everybody, so she'd get fired.
Oh.
And after that happened a few times, they even stopped hiring her. And she always used to tell herself, well, I had so much abuse as a child that I can't relate to people. And shortly after taking my program, she changed the story she told herself into, because I had all of these experiences happen to me when I was young, I have seen at first hand what human nature is capable of at a level most people cannot even imagine. And as a result of this, I can actually relate better to persons. And it took about 6 months for that story to catch on, but when it did, then she got hired again, and this time she didn't get fired, and the career took off.
So she turned something...
Change the stories we tell ourselves.
It sounds like she took something that she perceived to be a weakness and she turned it into a strength.
Exactly correct. Because that weakness only exists in your head. It's your job to find out how that weakness can actually become a strength.
I like that. It's your job to figure it out. That's absolutely
That's your
perfect.
challenge, yes.
Well, speaking of ourselves, how does our own ability to know who we are as a person, how does that play into, our own happiness and our own achievement levels?
Not sure I understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of just understanding who we are, understanding ourselves and knowing what we want out of life and who we are as a person, do you feel like having that awareness of self-awareness of our own self and our own needs and those sorts of things, does that also come into play when it comes to our happiness?
Yes, it very much does. What are we striving for? We think we are striving for material gain. Like, say, for example, if I ask someone, what do you want? Oh, I want to be CEO. You really don't want to be CEO. You want to have the feeling you would have if you were CEO. If you go even deeper, you want to have the feeling that you think you will have if you were CEO. And that's why you want to be CEO, because the only way you think you can have that feeling is to be CEO. So there's absolutely nothing wrong in striving to be CEO, but the notion that you're going to feel a particular way if that happens is a myth. And there is a way in which you can be fulfilled in and of yourself, regardless of whether or not you become CEO. That is the path that I set my students on.
I like that. I think it reminds me a little bit of the if this, then this, because it's like you're saying, well, if I'm the CEO, then I will be happy. But you're saying maybe think about what it is about being the CEO that would make you happy and sort of maybe look for that instead of the exact title. Is that right?
Correct. And you don't really have to not try to be CEO, but recognize that you're searching for CEO because of something else altogether.
Right. That makes sense. Well, you mentioned a situation with someone who had been fired from a job. And, if we're listening today and we are feeling unhappy because in particular we have been fired from a job, or similarly, maybe we feel totally stuck in a dead-end job that we just feel like we can't seem to go anywhere with. When that begins to happen, how can we improve our happiness in those scenarios?
You will automatically increase your happiness when you invest in the process. You do not invest in the outcome. And the very fact of investing in the process means that you're going to be fine. That's the point I want to get across. The more you invest in the process, the more the work that you do itself starts blessing you.
That makes so much sense. And it's so straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I actually saw an interview where someone was interviewing you, and you spoke a little bit about leaving the corporate world because, in particular, politics maybe weren't your favorite. And I think there's a good chance that some of us who are listening today are sick of corporate politics. It's been really maybe a tough part of our job. And because I know you've been there, what advice would you have for us if we're looking for a new job and we have this feeling like we're just really sick of corporate politics?
That's a very good question, because if I knew then what I know now, in all likelihood, I would not have quit my job. It's because I was unable to handle with it.
Okay.
So what really matters is, yes, there is corporate politics, and you can be very good at playing corporate politics while at the same time remaining true to your intent. So what I would advise a person is to think about, are you, in every sense of the term, working for a cause which brings a greater good to a greater community? Are you dedicated yourself are you dedicated to making the lives of all of the people that you interact better in some way? This includes bosses, this includes colleagues, this includes friends, this includes customers, vendors, shareholders. What is it that you're doing that will make their life better in some way? And you have constraints, which is what corporate politics is all about, people playing cross purposes, people undermining you. And look at all of that and treat each thing as a game. You know, you have someone who's a persistent enemy, and, he's always looking to subvert all of your initiatives, making sure you don't have the resources you want. What is it that I can do to take this enemy, quote unquote, and make him a friend? What is it that I can do to convert that? So you make a game out of it. And when you have a strong opponent in a game, the game becomes more enjoyable. So if you make a game out of it, then, you're enjoying it, and win or lose, you've had the benefit of playing an enjoyable game. But if you treat it as serious and say, oh my God, this is serious, this is my life, then you get miserable and frustrated. So your ability to survive in a position where you feel the politicking is high is entirely dependent on, can you put yourself into a situation where what you're really doing is playing a game?
That makes sense. So it sounds like you're saying sort of like emotionally separate yourself a little bit from the politics. Is that right? Like kind of like looking at it as a little bit less personal or something?
Looking at it as not somebody is out to get me, but somebody is out to do what they think is in their best interest. And it just so happens that what they think in their best interest may or may not really be, and it may have an adverse impact on me. So it's not malicious. It's simply they're trying to do their thing, and you happen to get into the way. You're collateral damage. So you protect yourself from that, but you don't take it personally. And whatever happens, the universe has your back, so you will get what is coming to you. And if it's not at this company, go someplace else. If you feel there are too many roadblocks here, go someplace else. But don't go someplace else from the feeling of, this place is so terrible, I had so many bad experiences, I want to walk out and never see the place again, and I hope the moment I walk out, a bomb drops on the building. And that's a lousy way to make a transition. Make a transition from the space of, I'm very grateful to this place for all that it's given me, but for my continued well-being and growth, as well as the continued well-being and growth of the organization I'm going to join, it's time for me to leave. So leave with gratitude from the place you were, with gratitude to the place you are going to. That's how you make a transition.
I like that. It's much more peaceful.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned having a cause with what you work on. And I'm curious, especially in the type of work you do, like how important do you think it is that we have a sense of purpose in our careers and what we're doing? And if we don't feel like we have purpose, how can we find that purpose?
You don't find purpose. Purpose finds you. And all of the time, I run into that all the time. People tell me, I'm not passionate about what I do, and I wish I were like you. If I had all of this, I would be passionate. And I actually have an ideal job exercise in my program where I get people to think about what is it that you need in the ideal job. and what will happen to make you passionate about it. And people put down a bunch of things. Here's how much money I'm making. Here's where I'm working. Here's how much travel I have. This is the kind of person my boss is, etc. You might have 15, 20, 50 different parameters. And I say wrong. First of all, the exact concatenation of circumstances you outlined doesn't exist. And second, even if it did exist and you were plugged into it, it'd probably be less than 6 months before you were as miserable there as you are now. Because the mistake we make is we think passion is in the job. Passion doesn't exist in the job, it exists inside you. And if you don't find a way to ignite it within yourself right where you are, you're not going to find it outside. Same way, you can't search for purpose. Purpose finds you. What you can do is whatever is to your lot right now, you do it with care, and you do it with intentionality, and you do it with the intentionality of helping someone. And you can do it in simple things. Like you pay money. You pay money to your utility company. You pay money to your mortgage insurance company. You pay money to your Wi-Fi provider. As you cut those checks, what's the feeling? Send it out with joy. Send it out with, I'm sending this. Here's a service I got. And even if I'm not happy with the service, I'm paying for it. And I hope that this money somehow greases the wheels of commerce and goes around and benefits somebody. So consciously put that intentionality into it as you're writing the check. And as you do that and you bring that focus of intention to everything you do at work and outside, you'll find that it comes back. And it comes back to you many times over in terms of the well-being that you will experience.
Mm-hmm.
So you begin right where you are doing what you do.
I'm curious, you have a job that is incredibly purposeful, and your focus, like we've been talking about happiness and finding your purpose. Was there something that in particular that led you to find your purpose and your sort of happy?
Well, absolutely. I was miserable when I was working in corporate America because I didn't like the politics. I went into academe thinking there would be no politics. I was horribly mistaken. Politics is alive and well in academe.
Okay.
And, I got up and said, this is not the life I signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
And all my life there, I'd been doing a lot of reading, spiritual biography, mystical autobiography. That took me to a very nice place. And then I came back to the real world, and it sucked. And I remember thinking, if all of this is useful only if you're sitting quietly thinking peaceful thoughts, but not when you came to the hurly-burly, then it's actually pretty useless.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow I knew that wasn't true. I knew that this was very valuable, maybe even the only thing that was very valuable, and I just hadn't figured out how to make use of it. And that's when I came up with my idea. Why don't I take the teachings of the world's great masters and adapt them so that they become acceptable to intelligent people in a post-industrial society. And that's how my course was born. And as I started teaching it, my life changed because all of a sudden I could relate completely to what I was doing, and it became a calling, not a job. We all have that capacity. We just have to find it. Every day when you go to work, you can break rocks or you can build a cathedral. I can't define for you the cathedral that you're building. You're the only person who can do that. But I can tell you that unless you find and define your cathedral, you're going to live a pretty mediocre life.
That's very true. Srikumar, this has been inspiring. If we've been listening today and we want to go and learn more about you and your work and your course, where's the best place to look?
Best place to do is go to my website, which is www.therao.institute.com, THERAO institute.com. And when you do that, there's a big button there called Join Our Community. Just click on that button and register. And when you do, you'll get my blog. And you'll also get details about the programs that I'm running. And that's how you learn more about who I am, what I do. And I don't inundate you with email. You'll hear from me maybe once every couple of weeks, and generally it's content because of a blog I write. And if you find that what I've said in this interview resonates with you, then you probably will enjoy my blog, and I encourage you to sign up.
Absolutely. Well, I will put a link to this in the show notes. And Srikumar, thank you so much for joining me. This has been amazing.
My pleasure, Angela, and thank you so much for doing what you do, because you're helping far more people at a deeper level now than you would than as an engineer and as a automobile company executive.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more people that subscribe, the easier it is for other job seekers to find the Copeland Coaching Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.